Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of this new season of the Live Without Training Wheels show. I'm excited to be back with you all. In the past, I've live streamed this show to Facebook and YouTube, but I'm changing things up this year, and I am live streaming only to my audience right here on Crowdcast. And the only place that I'm sharing about this Live Without Training Wheels show right now is in our private group, the Homeschooling Without Training Wheels Network. So if you're here, then you're probably a part of that group, and we are delighted to have you. And if you're not part of that group, then let me know because it's free and we would love to have you. We're going to be talking tonight about homeschooling with babies and toddlers and preschoolers and all the little people along. If you haven't already, go ahead and drop in your answer to the poll down there at the bottom of the screen. And if at any time during the video you have a question, absolutely go ahead and type it in the Ask a Question box at the bottom. You can also always comment over to the side. But if you put your question in the Ask a Question box, then when we get to the Q&A session at the end, I'll have a chance to answer it. And the cool thing about that is I can also timestamp those answers as I respond to them so that we can find them more easily on the replay. If you're watching this on the replay, you can open up that Ask a Question box and take a look at the questions we answered and even hop right to those answers, hop right to the place in the video where we answered them if you're interested in doing that. So without further ado, let's hop right into talking about homeschooling with little people. And I want to give you a little bit about my background just so that you know the perspective I'm coming from. I'm a homeschool mom of 8 kiddos, ages teen to toddler. And, you know, I know for some people, homeschooling with babies and toddlers and all that is just it's a short season and you just kind of hold your breath and you get through it and it's fine. And truthfully, even if that's you, it's still hard. Even if you know it's going to be a short season, even, you know, if you're in it, it's hard. So I don't mean to belittle that at all. But for me, you know, my oldest child was born in 2005. I started homeschooling in 2010. And at that point, I already had 3 younger children. Plus, by the middle of that fall, I was pregnant with my 5th. So, you know, this is my 10th year of homeschooling. I've never not homeschooled with babies and toddlers and preschoolers. And my youngest 2 are 4 and 2. So, you know, I still have a few years yet to go homeschooling with babies and toddlers and preschoolers. All right. So, you know, I think the experience for everybody of what it's like to homeschool with little people, it varies because it depends a lot about, you know, your personality and your children and their temperaments and that kind of thing. For me, at first, you know, I definitely felt that it was challenging while I was in it, but relatively speaking, it was probably easier as I was homeschooling my oldest because the next 3 were girls. And they were all fairly self-occupying and enjoyed creative, imaginative play and that kind of thing. And so we managed fairly well. And we could fit in little bits of school during nap time because at that point, you know, my oldest was only a kindergartner or a first grader. But then as we went along, child number 5 was a boy. And I thought, okay, wow, this is really going to be the challenge here when when he gets to be toddler age and I'm homeschooling with him along. And really, he wasn't too dissimilar to his sisters. He was pretty happy to sit and do puzzles or sit and play with Legos or whatever. After him was a girl, pretty similar. But child number 7 is Joey. And we affectionately refer to Joey as the ninja toddler. That's his nickname because, you know, when Joey was, for example, 14 months old, I went to get him from his nap. Couldn't find him anywhere. His crib was empty. He was not even in his room. So he'd somehow gotten out of his crib, gotten out of the room. I found him in a different bedroom, asleep in the top bunk where he had leaned out to pull the cord and turn on the ceiling fan before falling asleep in the top bunk. So, you know, a very energetic and unpredictable child. This is the child who is doing the things that you never, ever thought you needed to prevent against or prepare for. And he has definitely been the child who has taught me to be very gracious and patient with other mamas. I hope that I've always been, gracious towards other moms, but for sure, he's the child that has forever cured me of being tempted to say to another mom, well, if you would just keep an eye on your child, well, if you would just train your child, because he He's wonderful. He's adorable. We love him. He makes us smile every single day, but he is a little hoodlum. He is a little hoodlum. And I mean that in the most affectionate way. Like, he just is constantly doing things that we never could have predicted or imagined. And then behind him, we have George, who is 2. And so that's what homeschooling is like for me right now. Now, I have 10 practical tips that I want to share with you about managing the day in and day out of homeschooling with all of these little people along. But before we get to that point, I want to do something else that I think is pretty important. And I want us to lay some foundations of expectation. Because, if I just hopped on here and I said, okay, you want to homeschool with babies, toddlers, and preschoolers? No problem. Here's how you do it. Follow these steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then you would leave with some ideas, and, maybe you'd try some of them tomorrow and they might be helpful. But overall, you'd be left with the impression that if you just follow these steps, then you could have a carefree homeschool running seamlessly, just like mine does, just like hundreds of other moms out there do. And that would be a huge load of baloney. So don't worry, I am going to provide you with some practical tips, but I think we need to get our expectations straight first. Because when you set out with expectations that if you follow these steps, everything should go right, what you're going to end up with is a lot of frustration and a lot of anger. And that's not something that I want to set up anyone for. So as I said before, we have, Joey, who is a big handful, but, even no matter what the dynamics in your homeschool, I want you to remember that what you're doing is really, really weird. And I say that very affectionately. I don't mean to insult anybody, but look, in our country, even though homeschooling is on the rise, we are still by far in the minority, very much in the minority. And, even if you compare over time and in history, what we're doing is quite unusual. And I know that people like to say oh, well, the founding fathers were homeschooled and, people always used to learn at home and that was normal. Yeah, yes. And that's good. But people were not doing what we're doing today, right? There are a lot of things about our culture and our situation that make this really unusual, right? Like the founding fathers' mothers were not spending 3 to 5 hours a day instructing them in a variety of different subjects with standardized tests at the end of the year and reporting to the government about what they've accomplished and, needing to prepare for SATs and ACTs and college level work coming up in the future and all that stuff, while also taking care of all these little people. And one of the challenges that a lot of us face with all these little people is that many of us live in suburban areas surrounded by neighbors who all have varying opinions about what children ought to do and how much supervision they ought to have and whether they ought to be allowed in the backyard unsupervised or not and that sort of thing. And I know it's one thing to say, well, just be strong and stand up for yourself and do what you think is right. But, again, the society we live in, it's not always possible to just disregard the opinions of your neighbors and do whatever you feel is right. So I just want you to observe and recognize that what you're doing is pretty unusual. And even if you just consider the change in, say, the last generation, my mom, who, raised 4 children, godly Christian woman, she's actually a licensed professional counselor, has told many moms how different parenting is now, even than it was when we were little. Because she said, there's just this much greater expectation for there to be constant enrichment, right? Like even our little children are supposed to be constantly getting positive engagement from us and constant, enriching and learning experiences happening and all this. And she said, when you guys were little, it was like, let them out to play. They come in at dinner. If they've been fed and they're still alive and they have clothes on, you're doing a great job as a mom. Lainey says, oh my goodness, your Joey sounds like my number 7. So, all right, I'm in good company. So, we have these expectations that we're meeting. or that we feel that we ought to meet. And here's what you need to know. Nobody has a seamless system for homeschooling with the babies and the toddlers and the preschoolers. Everybody is winging it. And I'll tell you in a minute how I know that. Everybody's having those days where they say, like, am I crazy? Am I missing something? And if anybody says that they have it all worked out, either they're not being honest with you, or maybe they just have like one very compliant 4-year-old daughter, because the general experience, and I hear from so many moms, is just, a lot of overwhelm and stress and frustration about homeschooling with little people. And a big piece of this is that life, not even just homeschooling, but just life with babies and toddlers and preschoolers is really exhausting. It is a lot of work. So first of all, the hormones. The hormones are a huge piece of what's going on with you and just your outlook on life. And I'm not going to go really deeply into this because I did an entire episode on homeschooling through depression. So if you'd like to look that up, you can just search YouTube for homeschooling through depression. And that same podcast, or that same Live Without Training Wheels episode, would also apply to, if you're homeschooling and dealing with a different mental illness or long-term, chronic diseases or pain or something like that. A lot of similar ideas there. But, the hormones that are going on in your body are taking a toll on your outlook on life and your energy level and that kind of thing. For example, did you know that right after you have a baby, your estrogen levels are very low? And estrogen is the hormone that makes you more outgoing, that makes you more people-oriented, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, either way. And after you have a baby, the estrogen levels dip, especially if you're nursing, because it's your body's way of saying, okay, time to circle the wagons, time to stay home, time to be quiet, time to rest, take care of the baby. And so it's really hard to do a lot of people-oriented things, and you get, people overload a lot faster when you have little ones in the home, especially really little ones, and especially if you're still nursing. And that's a normal feature of how your body works. It doesn't mean you're lazy. It doesn't mean you're not disciplined. It means that your body is trying to tell you something. Your body is saying, hey, we have a big job to do here, caring for this little one. And, so that's something that we sometimes forget. We think, oh, okay, I need a strategy, I need a system, I need a routine. But this is taking a big toll on your body. And also, one of the things that is challenging, even without the hormones, even if, you're not nursing or anything like that, lack of sleep. Lack of sleep has a huge effect on your outlook on the day. So for example, I remember at one point in life, there was a screen to one of our windows that had been damaged. And I purchased the replacement materials at Lowe's, and I was going to replace the screen. And every time I walked past those materials, I would have one of two emotional reactions. Sometimes I would look at those and I would think, oh, it feels so good to fix things. I can't wait till I have a chance to do that. And I'm going to figure out how to do it. And it will feel so good when I figure out how to do that project. I've never done that kind of thing before, but I bet I can do it. And I can't wait until we get that new screen in the window. And then on a different day, or maybe even a different time on the same day, I'd walk past those materials and I'd go, I am such a failure. I never accomplished anything. Those materials are like mocking me from the corner because I never get anything done and I never will get anything done. And how on earth can I continue to manage a household while homeschooling these children? And this is just a complete joke. And I don't know how I'm ever going to do it all. And that pile of materials became like this little test case for me. So if I walked by those materials and I just felt like a complete loser and a complete failure, then I was like, okay, so that's where I am emotionally right now. So I'm probably not super reliable as a person to step back and take a clear analysis of my homeschool and my parenting and how things are going, right? It was just kind of like this little, what do they call it? I can't think of the word for it. A something marker. Anyway, all that to say, I could tell that maybe I was low in sleep. Maybe I hadn't had enough to eat. Maybe for whatever reason, just my perspective was a little off. And there have been so many times where I've heard from moms And the emails that I get are really, from moms who are really struggling. Like, I'm so discouraged. I'm very overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. This is not sustainable. I think we're going to have to put the kids in school. I just can't do this. And it might take me a little while to write back. And so a couple of days later, I get a chance to write back. I'm so sorry. I know this is really hard. And here's some ideas. And, I know it's really difficult. Do you have some support? And then they write back and, thank you for writing back. That's so kind. But I feel so much better today. And I guess I was just really down that day. And this is not to say that nobody actually has real struggles or that your struggles aren't real struggles, but it's just to say it's amazing how much the outlook of a particular day can affect our feelings about something, especially, like I said, if we're tired, if we're low on sleep. And even if you aren't low on sleep, I read one time, or I heard, that the adrenaline levels of a mom with small children, and I don't remember what the definition of small children was, but I'm pretty sure toddlers would count, probably also preschoolers. The adrenaline levels of a mom with small children are similar to the adrenaline levels of a first responder who's on duty. So like not a firefighter at a fire, but a firefighter who's at the firehouse and knows that he could be called onto duty at any time, because that's what it's like to be a mom of small children. It's like, things could be fine now, but at any moment things could change. And I can remember having this experience so many times where, say I go in the laundry room to hang up some clothes, and it may be only a few minutes that I let my mind be completely focused on those clothes. And before long, it's like I snap to, and I have this really frightening feeling as if I've been driving and I fell asleep at the wheel, right? Nothing even happened. Nothing went wrong. No disasters happened. It was just that it was like I felt terrified that I allowed myself to only think about the laundry I was hanging up for a few minutes. And I wasn't constantly on high alert for what are the toddlers and, little people up to. And, another similar illustration of that kind of high adrenaline level is I was doing recently an activity about relaxation, and the person leading the activity was saying, imagine a place where you feel totally relaxed. And she said the beach, some people at the beach, they feel very relaxed. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the beach, no way. Little people and waves and water, and like it's not transparent. So you can't even see them if they're under the water. Like the beach is not. And she's like, okay, no, but I'm not talking about like the beach with children. I'm just talking about just the beach and, the waves and the sunshine, and I could not even get myself into a place where like in an imaginary beach in my head, it felt relaxing. And the closest I could get to a relaxing feeling was imagining being at a campsite, because we actually haven't gone camping since we've had children. So my only memories of camping are kid-free moments. So my mental image of relaxation was in a hammock, in a campsite, in the mountains, and I could kind of imagine being relaxed there. But she was saying, okay, so then visualize yourself in this hammock. And I'm visualizing it. And even in my pretend imaginary place, I'm thinking like, okay, but I can't lay here for too long. I've got to get up because somebody needs me. Or, if somebody else is watching my kids, then they're going to be irritated with me if I stay here too long and I don't get back to the kids. And so just that, it's like chemical. It's just in your brain that you are on duty and you cannot rest. Even when your conscious mind is saying, no, you need to rest. There's this other part of your brain that's like, oh, no, you can't rest. You never can rest. You know how it is. Even if you get a chance to go away with your husband, you're still like, I hope the kids are okay. Did I tell the babysitter? I think I'm still responsible for this and that. It is super hard to turn off that part of your brain. It's just a chemical part of what's going on with you all the time when you have little children. And that takes a lot of energy. It really does take a lot of your energy. My midwife says that you'll start to feel like yourself again when your youngest is about 5. So I'll let you know in 3 years if that's true. I mean, since having my first, I've never been to the point where I had somebody, 5 years old and nobody younger than that. So, this is what you're up against. And this is no small thing. So instead of saying, oh boy, why am I why does my homeschool plan keep falling by the wayside? Why do I keep dropping the ball on, what I think I'm going to do? And we often say, I need to be more consistent, right? I have these things. I plan to do them. I don't get done what I'm supposed to get done. So I need to be more consistent. Maybe that's what it is. But sometimes, when we're dropping the ball on things, it's not necessarily that we're dropping. It's that there are too many things. And so some things are not going to get done. And we're doing really the best that we can. And really, we kind of, are in need of an extra pat on the back, because not only are we doing these things, but we're doing them with all of the added challenges that I just talked about in terms of the, lack of sleep and the hormonal and the chemical things that are happening in the background all the time. But I don't just want to portray kids as though they're just this huge pain and a huge drain, and they just kind of suck away everything that's valuable about you and leave you as this kind of shriveled shell of nothingness. See, kids, especially little kids, they slow us down. They are inefficient, right? Getting anywhere with children in tow, accomplishing anything with children around is inefficient. And actually, there's nothing wrong with that. But because of the culture that we are soaked in, our brain says, inefficient, that's a sin. That's evil. Nothing can be inefficient. If it's not inefficient, it's broken. You must fix it. It must be made to be more efficient. Efficient is always better than inefficient. But we forget, people, relationships, love, nurture. Those are not things that can be measured on a scale of efficiency. And just like I said before about, what your body does when you're nursing a baby and your body is saying, hey, now you need more naps. You need to stay home more. You need to move slower because you're growing a baby or you're nursing a baby. Your body is doing the same thing when you have little people. Your body is kind of saying like, hey, now it's time to slow down, because you've got this really important job to do. And you've got these little people who need a lot of affection. They need a lot of attention from you. And so, we get ourselves into this place of unfair expectations because we imagine, that we're just supposed to bounce right back. You have a baby, 3 days later, you've got 6-pack abs and you're back at the level that you were before you ever got pregnant, or back at the level that you were at like 8.5 months pregnant. If you're, super mom and you were doing everything right up until it was about time to have the baby. But this is pretty much a myth. It's an illusion, right? That's not how God designed things to work. God designed children to slow us down. He designed children to refocus us and to reorganize our priorities around relationship and nurture, as opposed to just checking boxes and accomplishing things. And I know it's tricky because, people still need to eat. Homeschool does have to happen. So you can't just toss all the check boxes out the window. But you're not failing or getting lazy or giving up or getting weaker because you're flexing more to give focus to these little people and these relationships that are so important, so important. Let's see. Okay. And, one of the things that's so beautiful about the opportunity to slow down is that little people change so fast, right? It's so common to see on social media, like when people, when people post pictures, say, of the first day of school or the last day of school or Christmas pictures or those kind of milestones. And they very often say things like, slow down, stop growing up so fast, because at that age, we realize how quickly our children are changing. And of course, you could have a whole conversation about, don't make them slow down. Don't make them speed up. Just enjoy the rate that they're growing at and all that. But that's the point here, is to just enjoy where they are and enjoy watching them make those changes. But the very fact that our children are changing so rapidly at that young age is a big piece of what makes finding a good workable system of homeschooling with babies and toddlers and preschoolers so challenging. Because the younger a person is, the more rapidly they're changing, just like with their physical development, right? Think about it. You have a baby and it's maybe only a month or two before they've doubled their birth weight because they started out so tiny. It doesn't take long for them to double that weight, or several months for them to double their length, right? The smaller they are, the faster the changes are happening. And the same thing is true with all kinds of, cognitive developmental things that are happening inside of them. So for example, you know how it goes when you have a littler baby, you can go to church and nurse the baby in church or whatever, and the baby will just sleep right through church and it's no big deal. And then they get to be about 3 months old. The Bible says that Moses's parents couldn't hide him anymore when he got to be 3 months old. I always feel like that is so true, right? About 3 months old, like there's no hiding them anymore. They're going to be making their presence known. And so, what worked before suddenly isn't working. And you know what we do as moms? This is what we do. We don't think, oh, I am so observant. I am noticing that my child is changing and growing and he's developing in new ways. And so I'm going to adapt my system accordingly. No, we look at it and we go, what did I do? I got it all wrong. My system was a bad system. I made a lot of mistakes and now I need to fix them because I did it wrong. But that's not what's happening, right? You have a child who used to nap at this time. He doesn't nap at this time anymore. He used to be able to nurse while you did this activity, but now he's so aware of his surroundings that he's too distractible and he won't nurse while you're doing this thing. Or you used to have a preschooler who would sit on your lap, but now he's too interested in what everybody else is doing. He doesn't want to sit on your lap. He wants to grab and do what they're doing, right? So children are constantly changing. And so I always say that the shelf life of any homeschool system, when you've got little people in the mix, the shelf life is about 3 months max. So if you start the school year and you get towards Christmas time and it feels like nothing is working anymore, it's not because you did it wrong. It's because your system has reached about the end of its life expectancy and it's time to just tweak and adjust and adapt. And if you know that ahead of time, then you won't feel like, wow, I'm such a failure. What did I do wrong? You'll feel like, oh, right, here we are at about 3 months. It's about time to revamp and adjust and tweak a little bit. And that's what a good mom does, right? A good mom learns as she goes. So much of parenting, so much of homeschooling is trial and error. But that's really challenging when the variables change every 3 months, right? Just when you've tried a bunch of things and you found something that's working, well, now the variables are different and the temperaments and the developmental levels are different and you have to do some more trialing and erroring. This does not mean that you're failing. This is life with little people. So, as I promised, I've got 10 suggestions and you guys, please feel free to chime in because this is not intended to be an exhaustive list. This is not like, the 10 written in stone commandments of how to manage babies and toddlers and preschoolers while you're homeschooling. These are just 10 things that I thought of to help you out, to give you some suggestions, to get you started if you need some ideas to go on. So here are the 10 things. 1, and this is everywhere. This is not my idea. I've heard this said so many different places. Spend time with the little people first. People often say, fill up their love tank, fill up their tank. And then they often will do better while you're schooling the older children if they've had some good concerted time with you ahead of time. And that can be really any kind of thing, reading a book to them, playing with them or something. But one of the things that I found really helpful is a lot of physical contact, because at that age, they don't so much need like intellectual stimulation. They don't need deep conversation with you. But what they do need and what they really do thrive on is a lot of touching. So hold them. If you're going to read a book to them, hold them on your lap, hug them real close, rub their back, stroke their hair, rub their feet, tickles, whatever, different children react differently, obviously, to different kinds of touching and physical contact. But the more physical contact you can do in a way that they enjoy, that works for them, that's really what kind of fills them up and helps them to feel seen and loved and important to you. Again, another very common suggestion, but really helpful, is to keep some special toys that are only for school time. I got to say, I'm not super a fan of, the sensory things that involve like billions of beans or grains of sand. If that's your thing, more power to you. To me, it was just more trouble than it was worth cleaning up afterwards. However, as I said before, with the importance of physical touch, that might be the only thing that works for your child. So if that's what you want to do, that's great. But the kinds of things that I keep in buckets are like Lincoln Logs or big chunky Duplos or different things like that, where it's like cleanup is pretty simple. It's just scoop and dump. And I have several things like that I keep up in the attic, and I pull them out on rotation, and I keep them out for about a week, right? At about a week, they're no longer something where the kids are like, is it school time yet? Because I want to go play with the fill in the blank. So if you switch it out, and if you have 4 to 6 items, then there's enough space in between them that they're new and fresh again when you rotate them down. So that's one idea. Another one is to rotate out kids who play with the little kids. Now, if you've got a bunch of bigger kids, that's great. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have, a preschooler and a toddler, and then you've got like, a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds can really be great play companions. They're not big enough to babysit. They're not big enough to fix lunch for the little people, but they are big enough to make sure that the little people don't, go throw things in the potty or, climb a shelf or whatever. They're at the very least, they're big enough to yell or come tell you if some disaster is happening, so that you really can give more of your focus to what's happening, in the school, in the lesson that you're teaching. And so right now, my 6-year-old and 8-year-old can play upstairs with the 4 and the 2-year-old for maybe 45 minutes, like definitely way longer than I could leave the 4 and the 2-year-old by themselves and trust them to be, not a harm to themselves or property unsupervised. So even though the 6 and the 8-year-old are still kind of young themselves, they can do that job, and they do it pretty well. And they're playing also with whatever that fun toy is that we save only for school time. Also, if you're rotating out kids and you've got some slightly older kids, like maybe middle schoolers or even high schoolers, then have those older children do something different with the little ones. So like, for example, the 6-year-old and the 8-year-old, they're playing Lincoln Logs with the 2 and 4-year-old. But then when the 9 and 11-year-olds come in and they have some time with the 2 and 4-year-olds, they might be reading books to them, or they might be showing them colors or something like that. Something where, it's not something the 6 and the 8-year-old can do. So it just provides a little variety, a little change of activity. All right, here's another idea. If you don't have people to watch your children, if you don't have older children that you can rotate out, maybe you only have one kid who's school aged, and when you're doing school with that older kid, so there's nobody to rotate out. Or maybe you've tried the rotating out of kids, and for whatever reason, just the people dynamics or the personalities of your children, like that is not more help than it's worth. Like it's causing more trouble than it's solving. Okay, then another idea is to have kind of like stations for your baby or toddler or preschooler. And if you've got multiple ones, then you put them each in a different place and you rotate people. So maybe you have like a pack and play or a play yard that has a few things in it. Maybe you have a blanket on the floor that has a few things on it. Maybe you've got a high chair with a couple of things nearby. And so you plop the kid in the high chair and you start doing school. And when they get antsy, you take something off their tray and provide them with something else. And when that's not working, you scoop them up out of the high chair and you plop them down on the blanket on the floor. And they play there for a little while. And when they start to get a little antsy or they're not interested anymore, then you scoop them up off the blanket and you plop them in the pack and play. And by the time they're then done there, you move them back to the high chair. So you're rotating. They're still with you and they're still nearby, but you're moving them from thing to thing. And you've got it set up beforehand. So you're not kind of like, they're bored with that. Quick, let me scramble. I've got to find something else they can do. It's all set. So you just kind of keep scooping them up and moving them to the next thing. And again, this is going to vary depending on your child, their developmental level, their attention span, all that, different for all different kids. Another activity that I do with them is to put some in the bathtub. And of course, this depends on your, the layout of your house and where the bathtub is. My dining room table, I have a straight line of sight from the dining room through the kitchen and into the downstairs bathroom, which is a full bathroom and it has a bathtub. So I can put the 4-year-old and 2-year-old in the bath together and they can play, and they will absolutely make an incredible mess of water all over the floor, but that's water. And just for me personally, water cleanup is way less stressful than sand or beans or whatever, sensory bin cleanup. But, it's up to you what you feel comfortable with. But that is a very wiggly, tactile, but fairly contained activity for little people to do. Another idea, if you are nursing a baby, have one activity, and it can be a school type activity like read aloud or like memory songs or something like that. Have one particular part of school that you only do when the baby nurses. And everybody knows the drill. So when the baby wakes up from the nap or whatever, you say, hey, everybody, the baby needs to nurse. So grab your blank and let's all get ready to blank, whatever the thing is, right? And so it's special just for the time when the baby's nursing. So instead of baby nursing, meaning like, oh, great, mom's not available, or, oh, great, mom's not available, we can do whatever we want. It's like, oh, this is the routine. When mom nurses, we do this. And, it just depends on you and your body and your baby's body. Some moms just, they homeschool from the sofa and they just kind of nurse their baby off and on all day long. And that's how they roll, and that's how the babies roll. But if if you have a baby who sleeps for a while and then nurses for a while and then is awake for a while or something like that, then you can pick something particular that you do during that time that you're nursing. Because if you have a baby who nurses only in particular segments, then your nursing is probably a little different dynamic than the kind of nursing that happens, off and on all day long. It's probably a different, like, okay, I've got to sit here and I've got to focus because this baby is like nursing seriously for a good straight, 15, 20 minutes or something like that. So, but again, know yourself, know your baby, know your body, know your kids, and pick something that works for you. All right. If you have a super wiggly kid, a kid who just does a lot of movement, and even, to the point where it's kind of distracting, like we are trying to do school and he is trying to climb across the table, or we're trying to do school and he is trying to eat the school supplies or something like that, then I have found, and again, this is what works for us. You have to try and see what works for you. But Joey, my 4-year-old, needs a lot of sensory input. And so I've found that if I hold him on my lap, facing me, like like his body is facing towards my body, and I hold him real tight and I reach my hand up under his shirt and I just rub his back good and firm, that will really provide him with a lot of sensory input that he was trying to get from a lot of movement and a lot of noise. And so, even though I'm a little bit pinned down while I'm rubbing his back, it's sometimes preferable to, him kind of jumping all over things and, grabbing and that kind of thing. So another sensory input that will sometimes work is headphones. So I remember one time my husband got a new pair of headphones and he was showing, he was letting the different children listen here, here's what my new headphones, and Joey wanted to listen. And I'm thinking like, yeah, this wild child is not going to stand still long enough to hear music in a pair of headphones. But the second those headphones got on him, it was like he was just in zombie mode. He was like, staring straight ahead, still as could be. Like, it was so noticeable because this is not a child who's ever still for very long at all. And so I realized like, okay, this is another sensory input for him that's supplying that need he feels for constant sensory input. And again, it didn't last super long. It was probably like 3 minutes, but to me, it felt like a long time. So, if they're a child that just craves that constant noise or touch, then you can find ways to do that just don't wind up being as distracting, like the back rub or the headphones. Lenicia says, we do a good amount of tub time as well. Shaving cream on the tub wall entertains them for a good bit. Love that. And it kind of gets the tub wall clean, right? Because you rinse it down. And you've probably got a cleaner tub wall than you did before. And she says, my youngest does the same with the headphones, I guess. All right. Another idea to kind of carry on the headphone idea is audiobooks. So, I never really thought about this. I should have. If I'd put any thought into it, I probably would have been able to come up with this on my own. But I have been surprised at how I can get an audiobook for my preschoolers, 4, 5, 6, that age range. and they will listen to the same audiobook over and over and over. And I mean, that shouldn't have surprised me, right? Because when you read aloud to kids, what do? They keep bringing you the same book over and over and over. Oh, Curious George, again, how wonderful. Just what I've always wanted to read. But it's not as exhausting if they're just listening to the same audible audiobook over and over and over and over again. And did you know that this is how children develop grammar and syntax? They listen to the same story over and over and over because their brains, we're thinking like, well, you already know the story. What could possibly be so interesting? You already know what's going to happen. Like you could quote parts of it from memory, but their brains are not just thinking like, oh, I need to know what happens next. I need to know what the end of the story is. Their brains are listening to the language and they're understanding how adjectives and verbs and nouns work together and how sentences sound and how your volume goes down or your tone goes down at the end of a sentence and goes up at the end of a sentence. If you're asking a question, like they don't know that's what they're learning, but that's what their brains are craving. And so that's why they want to hear those same stories over and over and over. So in case you're thinking like, oh dear, this isn't very enriching for my child because they're just listening to the same audiobook over and over and over, and I'm kind of a failure as a mom. Like, no, that's what their brains need. That's what their brains want. And so if they tell you they want a new audiobook, get them a new audiobook. But if they're happy to listen to the same one over and over, it's because their brains need it. Okay. And idea number 10. And this probably should have been idea number 1, but here it is. Get lots of rest. And I don't just mean like go to bed early and sleep. That is good. But I mean, you need to plan for a lot of rest in your day. Because remember, we said in that whole foundational segment at the beginning, this is an exhausting job. It takes way more energy than you understand because you're like thinking, well, I didn't run a marathon. I didn't even do a ton of loads of laundry. I didn't even go up and down the stairs that many times. Why am I so exhausted? It's because of all of the emotional and chemical ways in which this job is drawing on your resources. So you really are doing a ton of work, even if your muscles aren't sore. You need to have opportunity for rest. It's not laziness. You're not, being weak. You're not giving up. You're just listening to your body. And again, when I say rest, I don't just mean get a good night's sleep, because I know sometimes people are like, yeah, I would love to get a good night's sleep, but I haven't had a good night's sleep in about a decade. So yeah, let me know if you figure out how to do that. I just mean you need breaks in your day. So, even if you're homeschooling older children, it can be a sensory overload experience, especially if you've got a whole group of them together and there's a lot of talking and interacting. Even if it's completely wonderful talking, even if it's really good interaction, it's still a lot of sensory input. So, if you can get away for a minute to your room, or if you can have a nap in the afternoon, or, have everybody have a quiet rest time. We have always, even though my oldest is 14, we've always, now sometimes more successfully than others, I'm not saying it always worked flawlessly, but in theory, there's always been a portion of our day in the afternoon where everybody was in their own space, not necessarily their own room, because we don't have enough rooms in our house for everybody to have a room to themselves, but everybody was in their own corner of a room, or, their own bed or something like that, doing some quiet activity. It might be independent schoolwork for the older ones. It might be something on a tablet or listening to an audiobook. It might be playing with cars or something like that. But everybody's in their own space doing their own thing, including mommy. And I'm usually doing something that is not school related. It might just be reading. It might just be like my brain break thing is I like to play that game Flow on my tablet. I don't know why, but that is super relaxing for me. I think it's just maybe the colors and the thinking that's a completely different kind of thinking that I have than what I have to do during homeschooling and managing children. But anyway, and then a lot of times what I'm doing is blogging or preparation for a live video or something, because for me, that's a break. It's not my regular thing. It's a different kind of thing. And so it gives my brain a break from switching, off of school mode onto something else that I find enjoyable. So I think it's super, super important for you to be able to have the energy and the focus that you need to do school when you're doing school, because I mean, honestly, it's like managing a 3-ring circus, right? You got the people here doing this thing and the people here doing this thing and the people upstairs who you hope are doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing upstairs, but you're not quite sure. And there seem to be a lot of thumps that you wouldn't have expected, so you're kind of managing all this and you have to be on a lot. So do give yourself margins in the schedule. Do give yourself opportunities for just a breather. It doesn't have to be super long, but you need them. You need those margins. So those are my suggestions, both kind of the philosophy behind thinking about homeschooling with babies and toddlers and preschoolers, and then also some practical tips. And I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts, things you've tried. If you've got questions about what you're working through right now, I'd love to hear more about that too. Okay, well, I don't see anything unless you're in the middle of typing a comment. Maybe pop an emoji into the chat window or something so I don't cut you off if you're about to say something. All right, well, thank you, Lainey. Thanks, y'all, for joining me this evening. And as usual, as soon as I get this video uploaded, I'll share it in the Homeschooling Without Training Wheels network, so you can watch the replay, chat on it about it there. But even as soon as I finish here, as soon as I log off, about 5 minutes later, the replay is available right here in this same spot. And that's always the case. If you ever watch a Crowdcast video, once you've registered, you can go back to the exact same link in the exact same spot to find the replay. Lenicia says, I love the station idea. It seems like I try to just put new activities in front of the kiddo. Yep. So it's just kind of a variation on that theme. Leave the activities and move the kid. Lainey says, thanks, Lena. These are great suggestions. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I will see you in October. And in October, we're going to be talking about writing, and I'll add more details about those upcoming events to the Homeschooling Without Training Wheels network, and I'll see you in there.